What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. End of November, a record low for the Russian ruble ignited a new debate, with many rushing to interpret the drop through classical economic principles. They argue that a weaker currency may elevate exporters' revenues and stimulate certain sectors of the national economy, since they get paid in dollars and then exchange it to rubles to pay salaries and for raw materials. Some officials, including Finance Minister Anton Silvanov, have hinted that this is merely another adaptive mechanism, one that may even support particular industries and enhance budgetary goals. On the surface, such logic suggests that the currency's decline could be manageable or even beneficial in the long run. Yet, these assessments hang by a thread upon a pair of false premises. They rely on the idea that reckless wartime spending, relentless mobilization of labor and resources, and crippling sanctions might somehow yield a net positive for the country's economy. All of this because they receive more rubles for selling things in dollars. Just this one thing somehow compensates everything bad that's happening within the Russian economy. They also assume that conventional economic models can be applied without modification to a current environment, in which national policy is geared towards destruction rather than production. What they do not take into consideration is that almost every region in Russia is rapidly losing able-bodied men. Some regions have them at critically low levels. Men who can work both with their hands and their brains, men who can start and raise a family, and greatly contribute to small economies of their towns and villages. While being so focused on major urban centers like Moscow and St. Petersburg, the Russian authorities completely ignored the idea that everything in the economy is tightly connected. You destroy a small village, it affects its neighboring settlements, which in return destroys already bigger logistical hubs. Sooner or later, previously untouchable multi-million cities will feel these effects. And the worst part, for Russia, is that it does not look like that Putin is planning to stop. It is true, in a sense, that depreciating currency can offer short-term gains to exporters. For example, a seller might receive the same dollar payments for goods sold abroad, yet once these dollars are converted back into rubles, the final profit is much larger than before. Salaries payments within Russia and every other transaction that involves rubles becomes much cheaper for the company. As a result, it is either the owners who pocket the difference, or they make the final products cheaper. In theory, this improves profitability and global competitiveness, particularly if input costs and wages do not immediately adjust upward. But over time, inflationary forces eventually erode these initial gains. Costs of imported components rise, supply chains strain, and wage pressures mount. In a stable, peacetime economy, this cycle can prompt a rebalancing that leads to sustainable growth, as relative price shifts push businesses towards greater efficiency and innovation, which is perfectly normal business process. If a company is never pushed out of its comfort zone and not forced to look for new ways to make more money, eventually such company slowly but surely dies. However, these concepts cannot be meaningfully applied in an environment saturated with violence and chaos. Models that predict a seamless integration between currency values and economic responses assume a society at peace, free to seize opportunities and channel resources into productive ventures. In today's Russia, war spending diverts resources into destructive endeavors, manpower is siphoned away into the military sphere, and the labor force shrinks, depriving the economy of its most vital input: people, who can produce value rather than consume it. These are the able-bodied men and women we spoke about in the beginning of this video. It is not just high inflation which continues to slowly destroy the Russian economy. It is also the future lack of workforce, which will only be felt years from now. And we cannot forget about the future generations of Russians. With fewer healthy and plainly speaking alive men, the Russian society is facing a major population problem. You never want your country's population to decline, but when hundreds of thousands sacrifice their health and lives in another country, with millions leaving their homes to never come back, without a doubt this will influence the statistics in the future. The apparent gains from currency devaluation that so-called economic experts predict to be the pill of salvation cannot offset an environment incapable of leveraging human capital for any purpose other than furthering the conflict. To understand why these principles break down under stress, consider Turkey's recent experience. Over the past few years, the Turkish national currency, lira's descent, has been anything but subtle. A currency once trading at under 6 lira to $1 now stands at a value several times weaker. This dramatic fall has been accompanied by inflation rates soaring above 50%, with periodic spikes exceeding even this alarming threshold. Yet, Turkey remains a tourist magnet and still manages to export processed goods and agricultural products. At first glance, it might seem that their model confirms the argument that currency devaluation can boost the economic activity and even make it look like that a country was able to reach some kind of economic prosperity during uncertain times. But a closer look reveals a landscape of unpredictability and instability. Long-term planning is nearly impossible. Contracts denominated in local currency become extremely risky. By the time they are fulfilled, the other party might receive twice smaller payment denominated in dollars. Renovations, business expansions, and financial commitments encounter shifting costs from one month to another. So many businesses prefer not to deal in Turkish lira at all, and it makes sense. This is not genuine economic health, but rather a perpetual struggle to stay afloat during financial volatility. Turkey's problems show that while a weaker currency can momentarily lift certain sectors, it rarely generates balanced or stable growth when inflation soars and the currency reliability crumbles. If you have any Turkish friends, ask them whether they think their economy is thriving. I don't think any single person will say that's the case. If even Turkey's relative diverse tourism-anchored economy has struggled to find a silver lining in persistent currency weakness, well, imagine now the situation in Russia. There is no influx of eager tourists rushing in, almost never been. Not before the war, definitely not after it has started. There is no such service sector to exploit the price advantages. Instead, there is a narrowing pool of workers, a constricted supply chain damaged by sanctions, and global isolation that leaves any advantage from a weaker ruble looking more like a mirage rather than sustainable path forward. Russia's economic situation is not merely about a sliding currency. At its core, the issue stems from fundamental distortion. Too much money is being poured into militaristic ventures and too little into productive enterprises. Government expenditures keep rising, aimed at sustaining an unwinnable conflict rather than developing new industries or upgrading infrastructure. The central bank's attempts to contain inflation through interest rate hikes end up fueling more government spending, as the state compensates for the stricter lending environment by flooding the system with additional liquidity. Imagine, you have a kid with a headache, and you give him a pill. And after taking it, he starts hitting his head against the wall, causing more pain. That's the relationship I see right now between the central bank policy suggestions and advice it gives to the regime of Putin, and the counterproductive actions the regime takes. Elvira Nabiulina almost literally says, "Do this, and it might, just might help." And Putin be like, "Hey, don't worry, we got it. Stop listening to Ukrainian propaganda, our economy is fine." Generally speaking, yes. As you can already see, exporters might welcome a cheaper ruble, translating their dollar-denominated revenues into more local currency. But the costs they face, from imported machinery to critical components, also climb. Inflationary pressures swirl through the economy, raising the price of everything from raw materials to services. Nobody wants to work pre-war jobs for $600 per month, when you can assume military uniforms for $1,000. Loan rates become unmanageable, deterring any meaningful investment, both internal and external. In this war-driven economy, there is no chance for the relocation of labor and capital into thriving export-oriented industries because there are no spare workers, no surplus facilities waiting to be used. Working-age people are either fighting in Ukraine or working in the military-related industries. Those who remained with their current employers are jealous of their friends, assembling drones and making twice their normal salaries. So they too start looking for an opportunity to make more money. And not even every non-war related business owner is ready to double the salaries just to stay competitive. The labor market is under siege. Skilled workers are either absorbed by the war effort or have vanished from the economic landscape completely. Even the cheap labor from abroad is now less attractive, as foreign workers demand stable wages attached to something more concrete than the plunging local currency. Without a stable workforce or steady inputs, the theoretical benefits of a weaker ruble cannot gain traction. If there are no workers left to produce goods that are exported abroad and sold for dollars, the entire concept of weak national currency stops working completely. As long as the state directs money and manpower towards destruction rather than creation, the idea of a beneficial currency devaluation remains an illusion. The federal budget may accumulate more rubles by taxing the profits of oil and gas exporters. Siluanov and his colleagues may announce that revenue targets have been met or exceeded, but this cycle is self-referential and hollow. Additional revenues are never reinvested in ways that increase productive capacities. They merely feed back into the war machine and its inefficiencies, just so it, doesn't collapse on itself. If suddenly military factory workers start receiving pre-war salaries, the benefits of working in a war-related industry immediately evaporates. Tanks are no longer produced, drones are no longer assembled, and Putin's war machine stalls completely, which by the way can theoretically become one of the least expected ways how the war might end. No accounting magic tricks can conceal the existing distortion. The regime that dedicates its financial and human assets to violence cannot generate lasting prosperity. The so-called growth that arises from a weaker currency or any other economic maneuver will be superficial if the fundamentals are corroded by warfare. The final outcome is a perpetual downward spiral, where each new crisis prompts another illusory solution that leads only to higher inflation, heavier burdens, and diminishing returns for ordinary citizens. Eventually, the mirage of advantage fades, leaving behind only ruble's rubble, rising prices, and lives cut short. But when has it ever stopped Putin from trying to achieve his goals? Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work and see some uncensored footage from Ukraine, it is on my Patreon, also link is down below. Thanks so much for watching, have a good weekend, and see you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.